This is the first of a series of reliefs of sleeping animals. This is sleeping puppies. As you can see by this design, that the whole design is in the foreground. In other words, everything is in one plane. There's no middle ground or background. Any piece that you start, you should have a drawing of it so that you can stay within the consistencies of what you want to achieve. This is the clay of the piece. As you can see by the frame around the outside, that's a different color. The frame was created before the piece in anticipation of making the piece itself. The frame is made out of plaster, and then the clay is placed into the field inside the frame itself, and then it started from that. The clay used here is medium density oil-based clay. There's about an inch of depth to work with from the beaded peninsula that you see on the inside of the frame in the depth, the deepest part that it can be. This is the sleeping piglet's drawing, the final drawing for the piece. Again, it's in all foreground. There's no middle ground or background. It's all in one depth. The plan is to do it in about an inch of clay. This preparation for this drawing is extensive, where you're doing all kinds of research, collecting photos, mostly from the internet. We go to other places as well, but try to collect as much information about the subject matter as possible. Usually it takes several days to collect everything that I need, all kinds of detail, particularly looking for obscure photographs like that, for instance, is going to be very handy when we start interpreting noses. This is great when you start thinking about ears and feet, kinds of feet. Also, I study the anatomy, try to come up with different images for interpretation. All of this stuff is readily available on the internet. Just need a little time and energy. A lot of question about pig's feet, so we did a lot of research on that. Different images. The drawing is developed inside of the frame. It's in preparation for the frame is prepared for the drawing, and the drawing is prepared for the frame, so that it fits inside the frame itself, like that. So you know the dimensions are the same for the frame and the clay that you're going to produce inside of it. This is the completed frame for the second piece in the Sleeping Animal series. I have a large collection of all kinds of moldings and other interesting materials to use as frames. And for that particular subject, which is sleeping piglets, I needed to have something that was organic looking and sort of nature oriented. So what I had was a series of plaster castings of pieces of molding, which happens to be grapes and grape leaves. And I didn't really have anything for the corner of the piece itself, so I created this piece here, which is a butterfly piece of jewelry and another piece of a flower from a piece of jewelry. And this is mounted in preparation for the corner of the frame itself. And then a mold is made of that. This is the mold. And then plastic castings are made out of the mold and then placed on the corner of the frame itself. The outside of the frame is a piece of wood which is got a round over surface on it to close the frame in. So that gives me a rigid frame to begin the clay inside of. The frame is mounted on a rigid box which is made up of plywood and other materials to give it a rigid background, and that's in preparation for creating the mold which eventually will be done on the piece itself. The frame is constructed with a certain depth. And try to keep the depth under about 2 inches, 2.5 inches, so it will be easy to cast. And then inside the frame there's a piece of 1/4-inch plywood placed in the bottom of it, and that's to keep you from digging all the way to the back of the frame, so that later on when you try to cast it, the back of the relief itself is deeper than the frame edge itself. That's to prevent you from doing that. The next step in making the piece is putting the clay inside of the frame. What you want to achieve is that the depth of the clay doesn't exceed the inside perimeter of the frame itself. Or what it'll look like, it'll look a little like it's parts of it is popping out into the air. So I'm going to fill this up with clay so that it has the same depth all over. The depth of this particular one is about 1.25 inches in depth. Clay is a medium density oil-based clay that when it's designed so that it becomes a little bit stiff when it's cold. So what I'm doing here is I have it under heat lamps and I'm warming it up to make it more fluid so I can put it in the frame. This is the process of putting the clay into the frame. It's basically almost a liquid form, just a little bit, to level the field of clay out in the frame. I take a stick and lay it across the thing and make sure it scribes into the clay. And I pick it up and you have an instant of where you need to remove some of the clay. Just take a little off here and those spots where it's high. And now you have a reference for the next layer of clay. I've taken another copy of the pattern and laid it over the flattened out clay. This is in order to transfer the pattern to the clay. The way that this is accomplished is by taking a device which looks like this. It's got a point on it, and taking and punching holes every couple of every 1/8 of an inch or so through the pattern, so that you have an imprint on the clay itself. You can do this with just a common nail, but I made this device so that it's not quite so hard on the hand. It's basically a piece of metal with a little handle on it. You can put your fingers on it so that it's not quite so hard on the hand as a nail would be to hang on to. I punched all the lines through the paper and onto the clay. And now it's time to remove the pattern. Now we have the pattern transferred to the clay. Now it's time to really be a sculptor. This is the frame with the clay and the pattern put in it, and this is the design. Okay, if you carefully look at the design, you see overlapping pieces, and you have to make a judgment on which the lowest places and what would be the highest places. In other words, right here, for instance, this head here is overlapping almost everything around it. So I'm going to call that a high spot. All right. And then this is another one up here. That's a high spot. There. And then another one right here. And another one right here. They all happen to be heads, but that's all right. And so what would be a low spot? A low spot would be something that's behind everything else. In other words, maybe a place like right here, for instance, where this leg is low behind everything else. This one up here is low. That's very low. It's almost down to the surface. This area down here would be also low. So you make these judgments between the highest elevation and the lowest elevation. Let's start working by excavating what I know is to be the lowest points. So this, for instance, I'm going to excavate down to way down to the bottom. So if I take another tool, I can rake it to the edge. I want this to come right to the edge like that. That would be one of the lowest parts of the whole frame, where you want to get it down to as far as it could go. So in relationship to that one, start taking this out. If you can use a rake tool, works much better. This time I'm working on these 3 heads. You can see by this piece of blue tape right here, this is the highest point that I'm looking for. I want to taper these 3 heads into the background. So I'm working on the levels of them. In other words, this is the highest point right here. You can see that I haven't disturbed the clay. And then I'm working this one down below this one. And then eventually this one will go below that. This cavity right here, right there, you can see the color change, and that's the lowest point. This arm in here that belongs to this piece will be finally very, very shallow when it's finally done, way down inside of there. This is about an hour later from the previous video. You can see that I've pushed the head of the little piglet down as almost as far as I can go. You can see right in here that that's the surface, the bottom surface of the relief itself. Now, because I put 1/4 of an inch of wood in the bottom of the frame before I started, then I know I can go all the way to that surface. So this head here will probably go down some more, this will go down some more, and so forth and so on. It'll keep going down and down until I get it as low as possible, because I'm trying to get as much material up here as I can for this head, because this is the top surface here, and then this one that's going this way like that has to go behind this one. So you work one surface against the other and saving enough material on the upper surface as you can, and keep shrinking it back into the background. This is hour 13 of the work. You can see that I'm trying to move around the entire frame of the relief, trying to figure out if I got enough material between the base of the inner part of the relief and the surface. You can see by looking right here that this part right here is now down to about 1/8 of an inch in the interior. This is the base of the relief itself. You can see the color change here. And this is the upper surface right here. And what I'm trying to do is to pile these three figures up, this one, that one, and that one on top of each other, and make it look natural. And you work one surface against the other to try to get it to look like it's supposed to look. You can see by the drawing over here that, let me see, right here, there's all kinds of layers on top of each other. And the task really is to try to get all of the layers to look natural on top of each other. The next step in making a relief is making a mold of it. This is a urethane with a mother mold. The urethane is a rubber material which is held in place while the cast is being made by a mother mold, which is made out of plaster. The next step, of course, is to make a cast from the mold. In this image, you can see the mold in the background, and this is the cast. This particular cast is made out of aqua resin, which is a water-based resin. It's done rather thinly. It's only a fraction of an inch thick. And the final coats of it are mixed with fiberglass to give it strength. The next step in creating this piece will be to start painting it. We're spraying it with a red paint, and then it will be painted with bronze paint, and then patinaed with green paint. This is the finished mold for the piglet's relief. I find looking at a mold, you would not think that a casting could be made from it. The negative impressions never look like they have the detail required. I use a wooden frame to hold the rubber mold in place. With relief, I have found there are 3 perspective zones in the picture frame: foreground, middle ground, and background. In these series of reliefs, I have challenged myself to use only the foreground. In other words, there is no perspective in this piece. The other challenge in these pieces is the viewer perceives the animals represented to be life-size. Using a device of scale, making the animals larger or smaller, than real life. To add fantasy to design is not used here. Usually I patina or use a darker color washed into the crevices of the relief to highlight the depth of the molding. With this piece, the 1¼ inch crevices were dark enough. The pewter paint is very reflective, so the patinaing is not necessary.